My name is Lydia Velez. On the morning I had worked 10 years at Fenwick House without hearing a member of the family speak inside it, Eleanor Fenwick leaned across her breakfast tray and whispered, "Say my name out loud." I was holding a silver coffee pot, and for a second I thought I had misunderstood her. The house was quiet enough that I could hear the burner clicking beneath the warming plate. Eleanor looked at me with both hands folded over her napkin. "Please," she said. I set the coffee pot down and said, "Eleanor." Her eyes closed briefly. Then she looked at me again and said, again, "Eleanor." Nothing happened. There was no pain, confusion, trembling, or reaction like the ones I had been warned about for a decade. She understood me perfectly. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Eleanor's expression changed before I even turned around. She reached for one of the cream-colored cards kept beside every place setting, slid it toward me, and lowered her eyes. When Marin Pike entered the breakfast room, her mother was silent again, and so was I. That was the rule at Fenwick House. Nobody spoke. I had been 25 when I answered the advertisement. At the time, I cleaned hotel rooms near downtown Cincinnati and took bookkeeping classes 2 nights a week. The hotel changed my schedule whenever somebody quit, which happened constantly. Some weeks I worked 30 hours. Some weeks I worked 60. I shared an apartment with a woman who practiced nail art on a plastic hand until 2 in the morning. The Fenwick job sounded impossible. Private housekeeper, live-in option, health insurance, predictable hours, nearly twice what I was making. There was one unusual condition. During my interview, Marin showed it to me in writing. No spoken language inside the main residence. Her mother, Eleanor, had suffered a serious stroke 6 months earlier. According to Marin, speech and sudden verbal stimulation could cause episodes of distress and confusion. I asked how we were supposed to communicate. Marin smiled and showed me the system. There were green cards for ordinary instructions, blue cards for anything involving Eleanor's medication or appointments, and small writing boards in the bedrooms. A brass servant bell panel in the kitchen had been rewired so lights appeared instead of bells ringing. White was for the breakfast room, green for Eleanor's sitting room, and yellow for the upstairs hall. "You get used to it," Marin had written. She was right. That was the disturbing part. At first, I had to stop myself from saying good morning. I bit the inside of my cheek when somebody handed me something. I learned to catch sneezes in towels and close cabinet doors with my palm. The family never slipped. Marin communicated in precise block handwriting. Her husband, Grant, used gestures whenever possible. Their daughter June was 7 when I started. She carried a little whiteboard around the house and drew pictures for me before she knew how. To spell everything. Eleanor seemed fragile then. Her right hand shook. Sometimes she stared at the same place on the table for several minutes. There were days when she needed help fastening buttons. So I believed the rule. Why would I not? People with money have strange houses. I had cleaned hotel suites where grown adults brought their own pillows in vacuum-sealed bags, and executives who demanded every digital clock be covered before they slept. Compared with that, silence did not seem criminal. It seemed medical. By my 3rd year, I could work an entire shift without thinking about speech. By my 6th, I stopped listening for voices. By my 10th, silence felt professional. That morning after Eleanor spoke to me, I spent 20 minutes polishing an already clean faucet, because I could not decide what else to do. Marin came into the kitchen carrying 3 green cards. The first said, "Guest room linens Thursday." The second said, "Plumber, 2:30. The third said, "Please remember, Mother's voice protocol." I read that one twice. Marin watched me. Then, she touched 2 fingers to her throat and shook her head. It was the old gesture. No voices. I nodded. She smiled. There was nothing strange in the smile, and that bothered me more than anger would have. After she left, I went to the maintenance cabinet. I told myself I was looking for the plumber's previous invoice. Instead, I pulled out the oldest household folder. I kept good records. That was one reason Marin trusted me. There were 10 years of appliance warranties, carpet measurements, pest control receipts, chimney inspections, grocery accounts, and staff instructions. Near the back, I found papers from the year I was hired. There was a hospital discharge packet for Eleanor. Most of it meant nothing to me, but one page had been copied because Marin had attached it to the original staff handbook. A rehabilitation specialist recommended reduced stimulation during Eleanor's early recovery. Short questions, rest periods, and written prompts if she became overwhelmed. Nothing said. Complete silence. Nothing said speech could injure her. Behind that page was Marin's typed household policy. Due to severe neurological sensitivity, spoken communication is prohibited within Eleanor Fenwick's residence. I sat on the kitchen floor with the folder open across my knees. The refrigerator compressor kicked on. For years, I had treated ordinary sentences like loaded weapons because Marin had converted reduce stimulation into nobody speaks. There could still be an explanation. Families become overprotective. Doctors give one instruction and relatives turn it into 10. I knew that. I wanted that. So the next morning, I tested Eleanor. I hated myself for thinking of it that way. Marin had left for an appointment. Grant was at work. June was at school. I carried Eleanor's tea into her sitting room and set it beside her chair. She picked up a cream card. It said, "Thank you, Lydia." I stayed beside the table. Then I said quietly, "What day is it?" She looked at me and said, "Tuesday." "What month?" "October." "Who is president?" She gave me a tired look. "Do you think I am an idiot?" I almost laughed. The sound came out before I could stop it. It was barely anything, a single breath with noise in it. Eleanor smiled. I sat across from her and asked, "How long?" She stopped smiling. "How long have you been able to talk?" She looked toward the hallway, then at me. "A long time." "How long?" "I do not know when you would count from." "Years, yes." I stared at her. "You have been able to understand me?" "Yes." "All this time?" "Yes." I remember looking at the rug because one corner had curled upward. I had been meaning to flatten it with carpet tape. It suddenly seemed important to fix something small. "Why?" I asked. Eleanor folded her hands. "Because Marin is not afraid of noise. What is she afraid of?" Before Eleanor could answer, the front door opened. She reached for a cream card immediately. It happened that fast. Her face went slack. Her shoulders dropped. And the woman I had been talking to disappeared. Marin walked in carrying a pharmacy bag. She looked at me, then at her mother, then at the 2 untouched cups of tea. That evening there was an envelope under my apartment door. Inside was a formal warning. Violation of Eleanor Fenwick communication protocol may result in immediate termination. Beneath that, it said employee housing must be vacated within 48 hours of termination. I had lived in the carriage house for 8 years. My dishes were there, along with my winter coats, tax returns, and my mother's rosary, which I did not pray with but carried through 4 apartments before Fenwick House. Marin knew exactly what the job meant to me. The warning did not accuse me of anything specific. It did not need to. That night, my sister Maribel called. I stepped outside to answer. "You sound weird," she said. "I always sound weird to you." "No. Usually you sound tired. This is different." I looked toward the main house. Every window was lit, but no voices came from any of them. "Do you remember that nurse who worked here for one day?" "What nurse?" "A few years ago." "Lydia, you have worked there since flip phones were normal. Narrow it down." Her joke helped. I remembered the nurse's first name, Dana. The next day I checked old vendor notes in my own notebooks. I kept them because I hated relying on memory for bills. 3 years earlier, I had written, Dana Shu, substitute nurse, agency. 1 shift. After that, crossed out. I found the agency online and called for my car during lunch. It took 2 days before Dana called back. "I remember the house," she said. Her voice changed when I explained who I was. "I've wondered about that place." "Why?" There was a pause. Because Mrs. Fenwick spoke to me. I gripped the steering wheel. What did she say? I asked if her shoulder hurt when I helped her stand. She said, "Only when you pull from that side." Full sentence. Appropriate answer. I asked her another question. She answered that too. What happened? The daughter came in. Marin. Yes? She told me her mother sometimes repeated phrases without understanding them, said it was part of the stroke damage. Did you believe her? Dana was quiet. At the time? Enough. What does that mean? It means I was temporary staff in a private house, and the daughter had legal authority and a binder full of medical records. I thought maybe I had misunderstood. And then? They called the agency before I finished my paperwork, said I was not a good fit. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel. Dana asked, "Is Mrs. Fenwick still there?" Yes. And they are still doing the silence thing? Yes. Jesus. That was the first time anyone had said out loud what I had begun thinking. I told Maribel that night. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Why are you still protecting these people?" I am not. You are whispering. I had not noticed. I looked around my own apartment. Nobody was there. Still, I was whispering. 2 days later, June spoke to me. She was 17 by then, tall and serious, with Grant's narrow face and Maren's habit of checking everything twice before leaving a room. She followed me to the detached garage while I carried cleaning supplies. I heard the door close. Then a girl's voice behind me said, "Lydia." I dropped a bottle of glass cleaner. It bounced without breaking. I turned around. June looked as frightened by her own voice as I felt hearing it. "You can talk," I said. She gave me a strange smile. Obviously. I think that was when the last innocent explanation disappeared. "All of you?" She nodded. "Where?" "In the car. Restaurants. Dad's office sometimes. Hotels." "And your grandmother?" Another nod. "How long?" June rubbed the sleeve of her sweater over her hand. "I do not know. Since I was little." I leaned against the workbench. "You let me believe nobody in your family spoke for 10 years. I was 7 when you started. You are. Name now?" "Why, no. Why?" June's eyes filled, but she did not cry. "Mom said Grandma could lose the house." "What?" She said people would misunderstand. That Grandma had good days and bad days, and if workers heard her talking, they would tell doctors she was fine. Then there would be court stuff, and Grandma could get sent somewhere. That does not make sense. I know that now. A car passed on the road beyond the trees. June waited until the sound was gone. Grandma and Mom had a huge fight before the stroke. You know, about what? Money. She told me pieces. Her grandfather had left investments, trusts, and charitable accounts. Marin handled more of them after Eleanor became ill. Grant had put money into a business that was failing. Eleanor had found out. Family-controlled money had been moved. How much? I do not know. Did your grandmother want Marin removed? I heard them talk about lawyers. Before the stroke? Yes. The order of events sat between us. There had been an argument, then a stroke, then real impairment. Marin took control. Eleanor recovered, but the control remained. I said, "Why keep the whole house silent?" June looked toward the closed garage door. "Because employees are not family." That sentence stayed with me. The silence had never been for Eleanor. It was for us. The maids, nurses, repair people, temporary caregivers, anyone who could later say, "I heard her answer." Anyone without a financial reason to lie. I called the County Adult Protection Office the following morning. At first, I asked hypothetical questions. The woman on the phone stopped me. "Are you reporting a real person?" I looked at the main house from my car. "Yes." "Are you willing to identify yourself?" That question took longer. "Yes." I gave my name, Eleanor's name, and the address. I gave Dana's contact information. I described what I had personally heard and what I had personally found. I did not talk about stolen money because I had no proof. I talked about speech, capacity, access, the years of written-only communication, the worker who was dismissed, and June's statement. For once, I kept my voice normal. Marin fired me the following afternoon. She did it with a cream card. Termination effective immediately. Please vacate employee residence within 48 hours. I read it standing in the kitchen where I had worked thousands of silent mornings. Marin watched me fold the card. Then she wrote another. Mother will be transitioning to private residential care this week. I looked up. She held my eyes. I said, "You know I can speak now." Her jaw tightened. It was the first time in 10 years I had deliberately spoken directly to her inside that house. She did not answer. That told me everything. I spent that night packing. 8 years in the carriage apartment became 6 cardboard boxes, 2 suitcases, a lamp, a coffee maker, and a stack of framed photographs. I kept wrapping the photographs badly because my hands would not cooperate. At 11:30 that night, someone tapped on the window. It was June. I let her in. "They are moving Grandma Friday morning," she said. "Where?" "Some private place near Dayton. I do not know the name." "Does she want to go?" "No." "Will she say that?" June looked down. "If Mom is there, I do not know." I called the county number again. This time, I did not ask hypothetical questions. Friday morning, a black sport utility vehicle was parked in front of Fenwick House. I arrived just after 8. Technically, I no longer worked there. The termination card was in my coat pocket. Marin met me in the foyer. "You are no longer permitted in employee areas," she said. Her voice surprised me. It was not because I had never heard it. I had heard recordings and voicemails outside the house. Once, years earlier, I heard her speaking on the phone near the front gate. But inside Fenwick House, her voice sounded indecent, like shoes on a church altar. "You are talking," I said. She glanced behind me. A woman from the county had arrived with another professional whose exact title I do not remember because I was watching Marin's face. The transfer vehicle remained outside. Marin became calm. That was her great skill. She could make control look like competence. She explained that her mother had complex neurological limitations, that I was a recently terminated domestic employee, that emotions were running high, and that relocation had been planned for months. The county visitor asked to see Eleanor before she left. Marin objected politely. The visitor insisted politely. We went to the breakfast room. Eleanor sat in the same chair where she had spoken to me 6 days earlier. A suitcase stood near the wall. Marin placed several cream cards in front of her. "My mother communicates best through writing," she said. The evaluator pulled out a chair. "Mrs. Fenwick, I would like to speak with you privately." Marin said. "Speech can be disorienting." The evaluator looked at her. "Then we need to determine that independently." Nobody moved. I saw Eleanor's fingers resting on the cream cards. For 10 years, I had obeyed. I had even taught new employees to obey. No talking near Mrs. Fenwick. No television audio. No verbal questions. I had enforced Marin's rule because I believed being good at my job meant respecting it. So, I broke it. "Mrs. Fenwick," I said, "do you want to leave this house today?" Marin turned toward me. Eleanor looked at her daughter, then she looked at me. "No." One syllable. Marin reacted immediately. This is exactly the kind of intermittent response I described. She has isolated lucid. The evaluator interrupted. "Mrs. Fenwick, can you tell me where you are?" "My home." "What city are we near?" "Cincinnati." "What month is it?" "October." "What are you being asked to do today?" "Move." "Do you want to?" "No. Why not?" Eleanor's mouth tightened. "Because my daughter arranged it after Lydia started asking questions." Marin stood. "This interview is becoming inappropriate." From the doorway, June said, "Grandma has talked for years." Everyone looked at her. Marin said, "June." June stepped into the room. "We talk in the car. We talk at restaurants. Grandma talks too. Grant appeared behind her. That is enough. His voice echoed strangely in the breakfast room. June turned on him. You just talked. He stared at her. For a second, nobody seemed to understand why that mattered. Then everyone did. The great medical rule of Fenwick House was collapsing because the people who had protected it could no longer remember to perform it. Marin began explaining. Grant contradicted her. June interrupted both of them. Eleanor kept answering the evaluator's questions. 3 people who had spent years communicating with me through cards were suddenly talking over one another. I found myself staring at stupid details. The coffee ring beside Grant's hand, a loose thread on June's cuff, and 1 blueberry left on Eleanor's plate. Human voices filled the room, and nothing terrible happened. There was no medical crisis, collapse, or confusion. There were only consequences. The move was stopped that morning. It was not stopped permanently or instantly through some dramatic court order. It was stopped long enough for independent evaluation. That was enough. Eleanor was assessed again over the following weeks by people Marin had not selected. Her limitations were real, and that mattered. She had suffered a stroke. She had memory problems. She tired easily. Some decisions took her longer. But she understood far more than the records created around her suggested. She could express preferences. She could identify people. She could discuss her finances in broad terms, and she could object. Her legal arrangements changed. Marin lost the ability to make every major decision alone. Then lawyers started asking financial questions. I was interviewed more times than I can remember. So was Dana. So was June. My housekeeping notebooks became surprisingly useful because they contained dates nobody else had cared about. They showed when staff changed, when certain appointments occurred, when new household rules appeared, when Eleanor stopped attending events, and when Marin began intercepting all outside deliveries instead of allowing them through the service entrance. No single notebook proved everything. Together, they showed a pattern. There were investigations into money connected to family trusts and transactions involving Grant's business. Some things became civil cases, some became criminal allegations. Some remained disputed because the beginning was messy. Eleanor really had been sick. Marin really had needed to make decisions for her. The ugliest question was when necessity ended and exploitation began. I do not think anyone could point to one date. That is probably why it lasted so long. Marin never woke up one morning and announced that she was taking over her mother's life. She changed one rule, then another. She filtered one visitor, canceled one nurse, managed one document, and corrected one person's interpretation. Eventually, an entire household existed inside her version of reality. Grant cooperated with investigators later. His marriage did not survive. June moved out after graduating high school and spent a period living with relatives. Eleanor remained at Fenwick House for a while with independent help, although the house was later sold. She wrote to me twice. The first letter was mostly gratitude. The second was harder. She apologized for letting me believe the silence was necessary. I understood why she had been afraid. I also understood that she had watched me give 10 years of my life to a rule she knew was false. Both things could be true. I never worked for her again. I never worked for the Fenwicks again. Losing the job hurt more than I expected. For years, I had told myself I stayed because the pay was good. That was only partly true. Fenwick House had become the place where I knew how everything worked. I knew which cabinet held batteries, which window stuck in winter, how Eleanor liked her tea, where June lost her school forms, and which contractor overcharged. I had built a whole adult identity around being the woman who noticed what everybody else missed. Somehow, I had missed the largest thing in the house. For a few months, I went back to hotel work. Later, I found a position managing housekeeping staff at a retirement community. During my first week, one of the cleaners asked if she could switch shifts. I wrote my answer on a scrap of paper. She stared at it. "You could have just told me," she said. I laughed, but I kept the paper. Months after leaving Fenwick House, Maribel visited my new apartment. She was in the kitchen making coffee. I was near the front door sorting mail when she called. "You want some?" Without thinking, I reached toward the small table beside me. There was a stack of cream-colored cards there. I picked one up and wrote, "Yes." Then I stood there holding it. Maribel was in another room. She could not see me. Nobody had asked me to be quiet. I looked at the stack beside the door. There were 10 or 12 blank cream cards, cut almost exactly to the size we had used at Fenwick House. I do not remember buying them.